Welcome to GOATQUEST, ladies and gentlemen. Happy to be joined by another elite guest, a professional athlete of many years. I don't know how many people have scored a goal in the NHL, but I know it is a very small number when weighed against humanity. So welcome, Corey Elkins.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Joe.
So Corey, tell me a little bit about yourself. Obviously, we know you played for the Los Angeles Kings.
Sure. The decision, going to Europe was not an easy one, but things were going fairly well with the Kings at the time, and they had kind of revamped kind of the bottom half of their offense over the summer, and me hoping to become a part of that, bottom six, third, fourth line potential center spot. They had signed a few guys like Mike Richard. Well, not that he's bottom six, but anyways, the depth chart was filling up pretty quick over the summer. And it just became a scenario where trying to figure out what the right move was. I had a really good opportunity to go overseas to a team in the Czech Republic. Was interested in checking it out, trying something new and seeing if it could be something that could be a catalyst for, future years. I had a qualifying offer and my rights were held up with the Kings for another season. So it was kind of like maybe the plan was for it to be potentially an interim move to jump abroad for a year.
Help me understand that. So things are going pretty well. You came up for 3 games. You score a goal, which puts you in the record books forever in the National Hockey League, which has got to be something special unto itself. So we'll get into that moment. Then you decide to make this move to Europe. Was the move to Europe, hey, I want to work on a certain part of my game over there. I want to position myself differently for another go at the NHL. Is that the thinking?
Yeah, it was a little bit of that. And to be honest, they were offering really good contracts. So part of it was just economics. I wanted to go explore that and see if there's really great leagues and a lot of great opportunity for hockey players in Europe. It's a really interesting and a great part about hockey is like if it's not the NHL, there's great ways to make a living outside of the show.
So you go to the Czech Republic, you have a good season, then you end up signing another contract, I believe, with the Anaheim Ducks to come back. Yep. How does that play out?
When I was in school, Anaheim was it was LA and Anaheim were the two teams that I was really torn between which was going to be the right fit. And I was really actually grateful that they were still interested after that year in Czech Republic. So that ended up being a lockout year. And I don't remember exactly how the timing played out, but
that 2011, 2012-ish.
Yeah, yep. So ended up signing with the Ducks over the summer. And actually, things started off really great. We had an awesome team. We had a lot of guys that have been staple NHL players on that team since that time. Things went well. We're going well personally, too. I had a good start, and for whatever reason, just hit a slump and couldn't get out of it. And so they were going to send me down to the East Coast. And then it was another situation where it was like really torn between what was going to be the right move. And there was an opportunity to go to a team in Helsinki, Finland, which is like a very historic organization there in Finland. They don't offer spots at the time. I think still like they're pretty selective on who they offer import spots to. And so it was a really good opportunity. And so I think it was maybe February or January, I kind of left and finished out the season there with IFK in Helsinki.
And you had a career in Helsinki.
Yeah. I would have played there till the wheels fell off. It was an amazing city. It became like a second home for family and I.
Okay, let's pause there. Juniors, those years of playing junior hockey, best players you played with and against.
Oh man, yeah, good question. So there was actually, I believe Waterloo had Joe Pavelski. So Joe was, obviously
still doing it.
Still doing it
at a really high level, scoring a lot of goals in a lot of big games.
Yep. There was the Cedar Rapids. They had Justin Abdicator, a couple of other guys who had solid NHL careers, Zach Miskovich. On our team, we actually had, I think almost everybody went to, big-time D1 schools. I missed them, but Ryan Kessler obviously was just before me. Guys that I played with were like Nate Gennon, Sean Collins, Zach Dalpe. Yeah, let me pull up that Boston team. And I was the kind of guy too, like I didn't go, some guys really, they get to the rink, they look up and down the roster sheet, they're looking at guys' stats, they're like, they know everything. They know the ins and outs of every player. And for me, that was always just kind of extra noise. I liked kind of going into situations blind and I could just focus on what I needed to do to be successful. And So I was never one to like have a deep, some guys know everybody's stats and the ins and outs of every player. That was never me. Okay, here we go. So Nick Bonino.
Stanley Cup winner.
Yep. Colin Wilson, Kevin Shattenkirk, Matt Gilroy. If I was going to make a career out of this, I had to just become a very reliable two-way center. So, and the one thing I knew I could lean on all the time is my skating and conditioning. So I remember like at one point kind of building out some, this at the time too, I was learning the ins and outs and starting to mess around with sports psychology and making sure like the mental preparation side of it was there. Kind of made a really conscious decision to be very strong defensively, have a good stick, never get beat in the defensive zone, just be very reliable so that, coaches don't have to second guess putting me out on the ice in situations where we're either protecting a lead or, going out for a key face-off. And so, so that at that time is when I started to, I guess you could say, mentally mature as well.
You're playing you've got a National Hockey League contract. Take me through that whole process. And then, of course, you show up in Los Angeles when you get the call to ring the bell. Yeah.
After my senior year, the hockey season was over. There was still some time left in the NHL season. So the way the rules worked was signing an NHL deal, you had to go up with the big club. So I basically spent a month up with the Kings, didn't play games, but practiced and trained and just kind of got in that environment for about a month. It was fantastic. It was a great learning experience. They didn't make the playoffs that year, but, got to travel with the team and, just be a part of it and be involved.
Greatest month of your life up to that point?
Yeah, it was amazing. Yeah, people think about the travel and it is tough, but like when you're used to buses and that kind of stuff, it's private planes everywhere and the food and all that kind of stuff. It was pretty wild. Yeah, so then I ended up actually spending most of the summer out in LA, trained with the guys that were there. Yeah, spent some time in the off season with the club, and then the next year, things started pretty well, and we had a really great young team in Manchester. And there was some injuries that were happening, and I think there were some players that were maybe underperforming. So it gave me a chance to get a call up.
Take me through it. You get the call. I want to understand when you get the call. Who are the next people you call? How fast are you on the plane? You're putting the skate. When do you have the Kings jersey on? Like, give me this little microcosm.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So I got to remember correctly now. It's because it's been a while, but I'm sure the first call was from my mom and dad. Probably my grandpa. It was an emergency call up to Edmonton. So I think we had gotten back from a road trip in Manchester. So, at the time, now the Kings affiliate is not in Manchester. I'm not sure where it is, but I think it's somewhere on the West Coast. We got back in town. We were playing somewhere, got back late at night, and they said, hey, keep it quiet, but tomorrow morning you're going to, they need you in Edmonton. So you're going out to Edmonton. So I was like, couldn't believe it. It was like obviously surreal at the moment. Got out there, you got to
fly out of Logan, right? Or yours at Manchester. They got a private plane. They're flying out of Manchester.
No, it was I guess it must have been out of Logan. Yeah. Flew out to Edmonton and kind of beat the team there, and morning skate and right into the lineup that evening.
Now lead me into the goal, right? So now 3 games with the big club. Where does the goal happen? And how does it happen? And give me who assisted on it.
Yeah.
Give me the picture.
Sure. First game in Edmonton was, played okay. Things were happening quick, and it took. I've always been a guy that takes me a minute to adjust, but once I get adjusted, I can usually figure it out pretty well. And so Edmonton game went fine. Not too many minutes. Played on the fourth line center, and then the next game, I don't know if we had a day off in between or not, but we kind of got right back on the horse in Calgary. So Calgary, I kind of got into a little bit of a rhythm, had some good things going, and I played actually on the wing was my teammate in Manchester, a Swedish guy. His name is Oscar Muller. And Oscar, as a 19-year-old, played up in L.A., but he was kind of back and forth between Manchester and L.A. So, so played with Oscar, and we were having some really good shifts in the offensive zone. And for how the goal went down, it was basically a cycle, offensive zone possession scenario. I sent it down we were on the right side of the ice, sent the puck down to Oscar, kind of got lost in the slot. He found me, and far side, stick side on Mika Kiprasov was
one-timer, or did you take a minute?
I'm a lefty, so the puck was coming from my right side, so kind of catch and release snapshot.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. And where'd you go?
Low stick side.
Low stick side.
Yeah.
And the moment, right? So you're celebrating with Oscar, your teammate. Who's the other line mate?
Can't remember. It might have been a big heavyweight, a guy by the name of Ritus Ivanons. He was I don't want to mess this up, but Eastern European of some origin. I couldn't.
You had some pretty darn good defensemen on that Kings team. So who was out there on the ice? Any?
Oh man, I don't even remember. There's a 50-50 chance it was Doughty.
Right.
I think he was probably playing, 35 minutes a night. Actually, another Michigan guy, Mike Green.
Mike Green.
Yeah.
Trenton High School.
Yeah. Yep.
Now you've got some NHL experience. You've seen the speed of the NHL. Best players you played with and against.
All through these years?
Yeah.
One of the favorite guys I played with too, and I think he's probably one of the best, especially in terms of his resume, is a Finnish player by the name of Ville Peltonen. So Ville played, I believe, in Nashville for quite a while, and he had a great NHL career, Olympic career, Finnish national team, all that stuff. And by the time, I think my first full year in IFK was his last year playing professionally. Now he coaches. Ville was one of the most special players I had ever played with. He just his vision and how he controlled the play and the way he saw the game. He was probably the most, as a line mate, he was probably the best player I've ever played with.
What were some of the fun moments of playing in the European versus AHL, NHL?
Relative to the AHL, some towns are different than others, but the fan base in some of these towns it's amazing. Obviously, slightly smaller venues. I think the building in Helsinki maybe was 8,000 to 10,000 people, but it's their NHL. It's a slightly smaller atmosphere than an NHL environment, but it's a big city and
it's their NHL in a country that doesn't really have football, baseball, basketball at the level. So it's really their NHL if there were no other major professional sports.
Yeah, maybe more like the equivalent of their NFL or something like that. All that to say, the environment in the building, the fans, the way the city embraces the hockey team there, that was pretty amazing.
Who would the Finns say is the greatest hockey player of all time?
Teemu Selanne.
Teemu Selanne.
Yeah.
Who is on everybody's list, by the way. We'll get to the list, right? This is the lead-in to getting to who are the great. But Teemu Selanne is the second coming in Finland.
Yeah, I mean, I can't remember the numbers, but his first couple of years in the NHL, it's insane.
Yeah, mind-boggling stats. You also played in the Czech Republic. Who would the Czechs say is the best player?
Jaromir Jagr.
Jaromir Jagr. Another one who makes every list. Any other, when you went into the little pockets, were you surprised that, wow, these guys don't think Wayne Gretzky's the best player? These guys don't think Gordie Howe is one of the best? Like, what were the other places you would go and all of a sudden hear a name and be like, well, I guess that's, in their eyes, this is the best player?
Yeah, for sure. Teemu had the Finnish vote for sure. That's a pretty strong one. I'm curious to see now what the Germans would say on Leon Draisaitl, because he's obviously a very special player, and probably it'd be cool to see what's going on back in Germany, right now with the success they're having.
How does it all break up in Europe, and what are the premier leagues?
The top leagues are Sweden, Finland, Switzerland, and then a top, probably the top third of Germany. I think that's pretty fair to say. And then Russia is kind of its own thing, but that's also maybe on a slightly higher level.
That's the KHL.
KHL, yeah. After the stuff going on politically, I don't even know what's going on over there. And in terms of where guys go to make the biggest paycheck, it's always been Russia.
Right. But Sweden would be a strong number 2 to the KHL.
Yeah, Sweden's a strong number 2. What was the other cool part about it was we did this thing kind of very similar. Well, it's called the Champions League, so it's very similar to what they do in soccer, football. It's like a tournament that spans the entire season. So you'd play the preliminary rounds first of all, you'd have to qualify based on how
your own league.
Yep, based on your own league, how you did, and so you'd play a preliminary round before the season got started, and then there was some follow on. If you made it out of that round, it went all the way through basically. I mean, after the new year into the national team breaks probably, but that was a really big deal, and it was a cool way to kind of see how you stacked up against teams from the other leagues. Usually in your pool, they'd have a pretty good mix of Sweden, Finland, Germany, Switzerland. And so you got a chance to, which is also cool, to go to those places and then also, get a chance to see how you did against those other leagues.
When you were living and playing in Europe, what were the greatest Europeans you played with and against? Even on the ice with. It just doesn't have to be a regulated game.
Well, certainly I already mentioned Ville. My last couple of years in Finland, you have guys like Roope Hintz, Miro Heiskanen, now Ville Husso here in Detroit, Sebastian Aho, played against him.
Decent player.
Patrick Laine.
Having a little career for himself.
Puljujärvi. So a lot of the Finns that were, in their first, second, maybe their third year in that league, they're now they're superstars.
Right. Okay, so we've gotten a little taste of the Europeans. The one that we didn't mention, we touched on it, but we didn't mention a player. Who do you think the Russians would say? Obviously, there's a huge Russian presence here in Detroit with the Russian Five. Who do you think the Russians would say is the best player of all time?
That's probably somebody from one of the 80s, 70s, 80s Soviet teams, but this is going to be a biased opinion, but my favorite as a kid was Sergei Fedorov.
Fedorov. I think Fedorov is the one who at the youngest age got the chance to do it on the biggest stage. Right. I wonder, would Fetisov be the best defenseman of all time had he played his whole career in the NHL?
Quite possibly.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a lot of debates like that. I'm sure that Alex Mogilny would get a lot of votes from people who saw him play at a very high level. I'm sure Tretiak would get a lot of votes as being the best goaltender of all time, even though he never laced him up in the NHL. It's hard in these debates of who is the greatest player of all time in hockey to shy too far away from the statistics because, as we've talked about, eras are hard to put your hands around, right? There's a group of people who will vehemently oppose some of the statistical anomalies that you look at in the 70s and 80s for goal scoring because they say, oh, well, the goalie's pads got much bigger, right? The goalies themselves got much bigger as human beings covering the real estate of the net,
sure,
right? And what Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl are doing today is just off the charts in comparison to what could have been done in eras past. But as we always talk about, the science and engineering wasn't at the point where Wayne Gretzky could take advantage of all of the great sports nutrition and science and weight training. Maybe he would have been a different specimen had he had the opportunity to be, right? You can't mix and match people and push them around into the eras. What's your take on that piece of the debate?
Yeah, hockey's a funny sport. You can have guys that, you watch him shoot a basketball or throw a football and you're like, this guy can't be, he's not an athlete. But then you see him on the ice and it's like, it's just a different thing. So that's tough. The one thing I think the goalie size of the pads and the way the goalies play is definitely a thing. And it's an interesting, component to consider. I think too, the equipment in terms of sticks and skates for sure are two things that are light years different than what they used to be. So maybe those two are the biggest factors, skate, sticks, and goalies.
What will your father-in-law say? And let us know who your father-in-law is, by the way.
So my father-in-law is Dwight Foster. He played in Detroit for quite a while, Boston for quite a while back in the 70s, 80s. He's a first-round pick out of the Kitchener Rangers and played for, first-round draft pick by Boston. Played for, I believe, Don Cherry in his first few years in Boston there.
What would he say about the equipment and the progress that the game has facilitated for current players?
He'd be on the side of the fence with, give those guys the gear and the stuff that we have today, and they'd be doing the same thing.
Yeah, you have to judge it based on what did I have to work with versus my peers.
Yeah,
right. Peer-to-peer analysis is what we try to go by.
Okay, so here's one, and this is a player that I tried to model or at least steal a lot of skill sets from and figured this out, especially on the defensive side of the puck, was Pavel Datsyuk, my absolute all-time favorite player. And I think one of the things you can consider in this conversation is how they impacted how others played. And I think the creativity and the things he did, people just never saw before. The way he made defensemen miss, or, the things he did, we were just like, what? Like, like a Ronaldinho or one of these guys in soccer that just like are absolutely almost like magical.
You're not the first person who I've heard say that. It's like when people talk about Gretzky going behind the net. People didn't get behind the net and then try to create from behind the net.
Sure.
Right? What were those things that Datsuk did on the ice? Because I've heard this from numerous people, that he did some things and saw some angles that now people are doing and taking to another level, but nobody even really knew you could do it until he did it.
Right. Yeah, a big one for me was he did this thing with his for stealing the puck. He would kind of flip his stick flat to the ice and use it kind of like a fish hook, and it just added a really almost like an extra couple of inches of length to your ability to kind of get stick on puck and actually like scoop the puck away from somebody carrying it. And if you timed it right and if you did it right, guys wouldn't even know it was coming. So you could like kind of scoop the puck and hit the brakes and turn around, go the other way. And the way he did that, it was kind of game changing for how you could defend with your stick. And it was like a sneaky skill that he had. That was something I definitely picked up and tried to take with me, especially as a centerman. Stealing as a category became a thing because of him. So category creating.
That's really interesting. So you think stealing the puck, it makes perfect sense if I'm thinking about it chronologically, that's when they started to talk about it because he was doing it so proficiently.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. It was something you had to be aware of because he's just lethal with it. The other thing was he just had this, probably like Gretzky and some of the other great playmakers, like had a way of, he was so dangerous with the puck. It drew more attention from everybody else on the ice and sort of ended up sucking more players to him, and then able to find people open in spaces that shouldn't have been open because people are just mesmerized by him handling the puck or worried about he's about to beat this guy. I got to go cover and help. And so that opened up somebody else. And just, his ability to ruin defensemen was wild. Beyond Datsuk, he was my guy. Fedorov, I liked, the way he skated was how I tried to model my skating and some of the ways that he actually moved. So when I became aware of like, okay, I want to look like that on the ice too, not just like the moves with the puck or the things he was capable of doing, but like actually his style, the way he skated really was what that boiled down to. Another guy was Pavel Bure. A lot of speed, very smooth, explosive, but explosive.
Got lost to a lot of people in Vancouver for a huge part of his career.
Yeah. He was another guy I really like watching.
Another one I'll bring up. When I started watching hockey, the Detroit Red Wings were a terrible hockey team. So I know we've mentioned a lot of Detroit guys, but the Wings were so bad. The dead wing era, when I was growing up, I grew up watching a lot of Maple Leafs games with Dougie Gilmour, right, who was just a fantastic hockey player. And then Wendell Clark, who was another one of my favorites, two-way guy who could do it all, be an enforcer even when he had to. But at the very earliest end, a guy who had played for the Wings but played for your LA Kings for the better part of his career was Marcel Dion, who could do it all, score from a whole bunch of different angles that people weren't scoring from at that time as a puck handler. Do you have any guys like that where you just love to see the magic that they could do with the puck?
Yeah, again, it would be Datsuk. I haven't seen anybody handle the puck the way he does. Going back to the guys that you mentioned, Wendell Clark, those players were, as a kid, growing up watching Don Cherry Rock'em Sock'em tapes, that was my exposure to those players. So not knowing a whole lot about the ins and outs of their game, I didn't have anybody like from back in that area that I knew to watch. I'm trying to think now, Steve Yzerman, being from Detroit, was of course like my guy for a long time.
Yeah, and a statistical juggernaut in every category.
Yeah.
From durability to points to plus minus, checks all the boxes. The one that stands out for me, the one that would give Yzerman the nod, is the consecutive streak of playoff appearances. He's a 19-year-old captain of an NHL hockey team who takes that team to the playoffs every year of his career.
Sure.
Just consistent excellence.
I guess I stand by the previous statement, whereas like keeping current players out of it, Yzerman's the guy.
So Yzerman gets in. It also, for complete stab in the heart of my grandfather, may he rest in peace, it also knocks Bobby Hull out. If Bobby Hull is out, the golden jet of the Chicago Blackhawks, that's going to be a tough one for some people. But that's kind of where you're at. You've got like The Bobby Hulls, the Joe Sakic's, the Phil Espositos, the Mike Bossies, those goaltenders that we mentioned, they're just on the outside of that top 10 looking in. And I know that there's some people that are going to bring up all the statistical things, and there's going to be some international guys, right? I mean, we could debate. You brought up Pavel Bure. He's not going to make the top 10 if we look at it from this perspective. Nicholas Lidstrom.
Yeah.
Arguably the best defenseman of all time. He's going to be very close on the outside looking in. Obviously, a lot of people will put Bobby Orr as that number one spot, and he's going to make it, right? Spoiler alert, Bobby Orr is going to be in the top 10. So let's run the rest of that top 10. If we agree with that, 10 spot is Stevie Yzerman's spot. Number 9, you already brought him up, Jaromir Jagr. Jaromir Jagr's career, probably the greatest sustainability of a career over the longest period of time being productive at the forward position of all time. What is your perspective on Jaromir Jagr, having played in the Czech Republic and then being around during his era?
Guy that figures out, he lives, breathes, eats, sleeps hockey all the time, and you can't do what he did unless that is the way you live your life. And so it's incredible.
Completely immersed in the game of hockey.
Yeah, still. I think I remember somebody telling me, this could be wrong, but like he never wanted to be married because he just loved hockey too much. He could never love a woman as much as he loved the game of hockey.
And the hair, I mean, has to have some of the greatest flow in the history of hockey. The Jaromir Jagr hair.
Maybe the most iconic for sure.
Oh, yeah. Set off an entire generation of people with bad haircuts. So after Jagr, who played for the Pittsburgh Penguins, played for the Rangers, played for Florida, you go to one of the Blue Bloods, the Montreal Canadiens, widely considered the greatest hockey organization in the history of the NHL. I'm sure that Detroit would put up lots of debate about that. I'm sure would Edmonton and New York for their great eras. But when you look at the Montreal Canadiens and all of their championships, they're going to have several names that pop up in a fight for this list. And one of those names is Guy Lafleur. So Guy Lafleur is another one whose numbers are just ridiculous. A goal-scoring machine in an era that was kind of the tweener era, right? When goal scoring hadn't become as ridiculously easy as some people say it became, when changes had to be made, when the goaltenders got bigger, when the pads got bigger. But Lafleur puts up an amazing number of points in his career, and right next to him would be Jean Beliveau and Maurice Rocket Richard.
Yep.
So let's look at all three of those Canadiens. And I put them all together. They're all going to make most people's historical top 10 lists. But I put them all together because they played, again, in this dynastic organization that just produced nothing but championships. And you weren't here for some of the other debates of football and baseball and some of the other sports, but you do have to use it as a frame of reference, right? Like, could you really say that Emmitt Smith, with the greatest offensive line of all time, was a better running back than O.J. Simpson and Barry Sanders, who played on bad teams and still produced the same, if not greater, numbers on a per carry, per game basis? It's tough, right? When you've got all-stars and Hall of Famers all around you in Montreal for 3 decades, and you're winning cups left and right like it's your job, and it was, it's difficult to compare those guys to some of these other players.
Yeah, I guess, maybe the devil's advocate argument is fewer teams, fewer, I want to say less competition, but it is a lot different now having to win amongst how many teams? 30?
Yeah. Plus.
Yeah, 32.
6 teams. It's an interesting argument. 6 teams, 30 guys on a roster-ish. Times 6, you got 180 players that are the best in the world. Right? At least the best in North America at that time. Right? You didn't have the imports. But the best in North America at that time, 180 of the best. Whereas now that would be one division. Imagine if all the all-stars in the NHL all played in the same division.
Right.
How good would that hockey be? So it's a good point. These Montreal Canadiens deserve, or habitants deserve maybe a little bit more inspection based on the competitive nature and how difficult it was to get the job done against the very best in the original 6. So again, we got Maurice Rocket-Richard, Jean Beliveau, and Guy Lafleur. Next up the list, here's again where I have some people saying Bobby Hull's the 5th best player of all time. Bobby Hull's got to be right in the middle there. And he fell right outside the top 10. But in the 5th spot, a guy who did it with and without the great one was Marc Messier. Where do you come out on Marc Messier being a contemporary, a guy who was still playing at a high level when you were starting your career?
Growing up as a kid, I had some sort of documentary biography video on Gretzky. So most of the hockey that I saw of Marc Messier playing was through, the highlights and things like that coming out of that documentary. And, those Don Cherry Rock'em Sock'em tapes. I wasn't like watching Rangers games or anything like that growing up as a kid, but certainly like also a leader everywhere he was, which is another factor that probably should be taken into account when you're talking about the greatest players of all time.
That's part of, right, the mystique of Marc Messier isn't just that he could do it on both ends of the ice, that he's one of the most complete centers in the game, plus minus is crazy, but then he called his shot and guaranteed victory. And guaranteed victory in New York City, where if you lose that after making that guarantee, you become maybe the scapegoat and one of the jokes of all time instead of one of the greatest of all time.
Yeah, that's wild.
You could be a punchline in New York really quick.
Yeah, that's it. That's wild to consider the other side of that.
So now we get into the top 4. And this is where any of these 4 guys, kind of like what we talked about, right? Teemu Selanne, Pavel Bure, Alex Mogilny, Sergei Fedorov, right? You got all these guys who are internationally the greatest from their era or from their area, from their geography, that get those votes. These guys would probably all get the vote from their team, right? From their geography, from their part of the country. All 4 of these guys are just regional icons. And the first one is going to be our highest ranked defenseman on the list, and that's Bobby Orr.
915 points in 657 games.
That's it. And he was a defenseman.
It's crazy. That's unbelievable. In 1970 and 71, he had 139 points in 78 games.
He had 139 points from defense. In hockey, in the NHL, a defenseman. What would you say is a good season for scoring goals for a defenseman in hockey?
Goal scoring?
Goal scoring, just pure goals scored in an NHL season.
Probably 20 would be a higher.
20 would be great,
yeah,
right? So if you scored 16 goals as a defenseman and you were a good defenseman, that's going to be a strong number amongst defensemen.
Sure.
Right? He scored 16 short-handed goals.
Wow,
Unbelievable.
That's incredible.
Unbelievable, Bobby Orr. 1.5 goals a game?
That's crazy. Here's an interesting correlation you can try to figure out offline. Every year he had over 100 points, he had 100 plus PIMs. So being able to, who knows, probably a lot of fighting misconducts in there, but that's interesting too. Those kind of numbers with being in the box that much.
So Bobby Orr from the Boston Bruins gets the number 4 slot. And now you're down to the 3 that most people mention in the same breath of all-time greatness. You already mentioned one of them, and he comes in at number 3 on this list, which is Mario Lemieux. Talk to me a little bit about what Lemieux meant to people of your era coming up, watching him win the cup multiple times, the crazy 4-goal games, the games where he has natural hat tricks of 3 in a row. The guy just did it all from everywhere.
Yeah, and the way he did it too, like being the size that he was and the way he moved, it was going back to like thinking about how when you're developing your skills and kind of identifying how you play, he was definitely one for me where I was like that silky smooth speed that was really, really cool to watch.
Was there a more dominant physical presence than Mario Lemieux?
I don't think so. Not as dynamic and as big as he was.
So size, speed, skill. Mario Lemieux ranks top of the list. You're forget the statistics, what he was able to do and his physical presence on the ice. He's in the argument as the greatest of all time.
Yeah, I think so.
Let's dig in really quickly. He's 6'4", played at 235 pounds out of Montreal, Quebec. Played for the Pittsburgh Penguins his entire career, which a lot of people love. That's another one of those qualities of loyalty. Stays around, stays with his – not that they were letting him go anywhere after the numbers he put up early on in his career. He's another guy who wins world championships, wins Olympic gold medals, and then wins the Stanley Cup and becomes an executive that's a part of the Sidney Crosby era of winning cups in Pittsburgh. So, another guy, 91 and 92, the back-to-back cups, and then the executive cups, 2009, 16, and 17, as I mentioned in the Crosby era. He's a guy who won 6 Art Ross trophies. He was in 10 All-Star games. It just goes on and on and on. So Mario Lemieux is our number 3 all-time, which gets us down to the final 2. These final 2 are widely debated, people just purely on the eras that they played. There is no comparison to them statistically, because there really is no comparison to the great one statistically in any sport. No one has dominated as thoroughly as Wayne Gretzky dominated the sport of hockey from a points production standpoint, also with the cups, also taking the Kings organization to their first Stanley Cup, albeit a failure in its final moment. But Wayne Gretzky takes the Edmonton Oilers to the Stanley Cup multiple times, and he has more assists than anybody else has points. I mean, the statistics going all the way back to his first professional experience with the Sioux Greyhounds, where he's 3 points a game in junior hockey as a waiver 16-year-old.
Right. 3
points a game. Youngest player in the league, MVP of the league in his 1 year of junior hockey. And then he goes right into the NHL and becomes all rookie, all-star every year, points leader every year, turns other guys into Hall of Famers every year. It's just astounding what Wayne Gretzky was able to do. I want to take the focus away from him for just a minute for our number 2, which is Gordie Howe. They have a Gordie Howe hat trick. It's a thing named after a guy. It's another one of those things that you talked about, guys who changed the game. The Gordie Howe hat trick, why don't you explain what that is?
So, yeah, Gordie Howe hat trick is a goal, assist, and a fight in a game.
Successful in all 3. Yeah, I don't think you can lose the fight. You have to at least have a draw in the fight. So Gordie Howe was a tough guy. He was an enforcer. I got a chance to meet him. I got a chance to shovel his driveway. His office was right across the way from mine. I'd shovel his snow in the winter. I got a chance to meet his wife, Colleen, who was a lovely woman. Gordie Howe was just a fantastic person. Everybody loved him. A very, very difficult guy to dislike. Off the ice, on the ice, the numbers were ridiculous. He retired as, again, in his era, the all-time leading scorer. He played the most games. He played so long that he played with his son for multiple seasons on teams, going over to the Whalers when the WHL started and then coming back. But he's the greatest Red Wing of all time. Played on the greatest lines of all time with the production line, first with Sid Abel and Ted Lindsay, then with Frank Mahovlich and Alex Delvecchio. I mean, 2 of the greatest lines of all time. Gordie Howe's at the center of both of them. And with the cups that he won in Detroit, just created a legendary original 6 status. Did you get a chance to have any interaction with Gordie Howe other than watching him on tape?
I remember a couple of times having the chance to meet him as a kid, being around Wing stuff.
Sure. And did Dwight, I mean, obviously your father-in-law having played with the Red Wings, was it still of legend, the Gordie Howe era, being just back in the 70s when he was still playing?
Oh, yeah,
at
definitely.
A high level?
Definitely, yeah. And then there's plenty of, firsthand accounts that Dewey has to remember some of the amazing moments and things like that he witnessed firsthand.
Great storybook stuff. So that allows us to refocus to our number 1 pick. Tell me a little bit about what Wayne Gretzky still means to the game of hockey and how revered that spot is amongst all athletes in all sports. I mean, again, I don't think that anyone has so separated themselves from everybody else in their sport than he has, probably statistically.
I think the number 99 transcends hockey. I don't know if that you can say that to be true for any other sports. I don't think it does.
Did you get a chance to see Gretzky live?
Yes.
Was it Kings or Oilers?
Kings. And
having played in the Kings organization, what was the Los Angeles vibe for Wayne Gretzky?
It's exactly what you would expect. It's absolute legendary status.
Which makes it even more interesting because most of these guys only achieved their legendary status as being that faithful guy who stuck with the one team. Gretzky has legendary status in both Edmonton and in LA. Goes above and beyond, the NHL. I mean, just the star-making quality that guy had. But when you look at his statistics, anything stand out? I mean, the obvious ones are the ones that we already brought up, but anything stand out with Wayne Gretzky's statistical offering as the greatest of all time?
The goals assist ratio is certainly telling on like how he brought up other players, and then to have over 2 points per game is just, it's unbelievable.
At the NHL level.
Yeah.
I mean, it's tough to have 2 points a game at any level of hockey. And this guy did it amongst the greatest players in the world every night.
For a very, very long time. And that consistency at all at that level is not easy. And to do it at that level of excellence is incredible.
So let's bring up one point of debate would be, well, without McSorley and McTavish, in a different era, in Gordie Howe's era where everybody had to defend themselves, does Wayne Gretzky's slight stature, does he survive in Gordie Howe's era at his size and his weight?
Probably. Yeah, he'd figure it out.
Speed, right?
Yeah. And, when push comes to shove, I'm sure he would have had to do what he had to do.
And the game-changing ability to see the ice. I love watching the stuff. I don't know if you've seen any of these pieces that they've done. I believe Wayne's dad's name was Walter, but they show Wayne's father talking about the way he watched hockey on television, even when he was just, could barely walk. He would hold a pad of paper and he would be watching the television set, but he would be drawing the movement of the players on a pad of paper, which, again, I got a chance to meet Gretzky once at his camp that my son attended in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, where they keep a house. And his son Ty runs the camp now, a really fun camp experience for the kids to go to. But Gretzky comes down, signs, my son has his autograph and has a picture with the great one. The story goes that drawing while he was watching TV kind of gave birth to this style that a lot of people remark with him, where he was constantly in circular motion, right? He was constantly picking up things with his peripheral vision, staying in motion, always on a turn, ready to hit the gas, right? Always keeping speed front and center and getting where he needed to get. And the classic comments of skating where the puck is going to be, not where it is, all those great euphemisms that people give of Gretzky. When you saw him, did you get a chance to see that he was doing something differently than anybody else was?
Definitely. That's sort of the trademark of a lot of these people that are capable of making these lists. They do things differently and their mind just works differently. Not even, it seems like in hockey, but in business or having that type of success, they're just seeing things in a different way. It's an interesting thing now having kids and trying to teach them the game and not boxing them into a certain way of playing or a certain set of skills, because you almost want them to figure out something creative like he did along their journey that's inspirational to set them apart from everybody else and do something different from everybody else. And it'd be interesting to hear along his journey, because I'm sure there were probably coaches trying to tell him to do things differently to fit a mold, and how he was capable of continuously doing what he did and producing the way he did, it'd be a cool conversation to have with him.
So the great one, number 1, Gordie Howe, number 2, and we back out to Mario Lemieux as number 3. Bobby Orr, the top defenseman of all time, comes in at number 4, and Marc Messier, maybe one of the greatest leaders of all time, called the greatest shot of all time, at number 5. There's certainly going to be people who want to bring up others. I'm certain that the Montreal fans would be all over Rocket Richard and Guy Lafleur and the rest of them. I'm certain that Doug Harvey, the great Montreal defenseman, or Larry Robinson, who scored the most goals on defense, that their names, from the defensemen would be mentioned. Out of the guys who are playing today, before we leave this category, out of the guys today, we mentioned a couple of them. Who else do you think has a chance to crack this list as they move forward and head into retirement?
Certainly Connor McDavid. I don't know if we've actually talked about him yet.
Not at all, really.
Yeah. The speed that he plays at, and the numbers that he's putting up, and the way he elevates everyone else around him, it's Gretzky-esque, Crosby-esque. So it'd be interesting to see, like people's thoughts on that. And
do you think Draisaitl has elevated his game, or do you because of McDavid? Or he's even doing it when McDavid's not on the ice.
Yeah, no, for sure. There's definitely something to that where you play at that level for so long, you start to see things differently and capable of doing things differently. And for sure, on doing things on shifts on his own and creating the offense and the stuff that he's doing, it's for sure it's been inspired in large part by playing with McDavid for this amount of time, for sure.
Yeah, we brought up Sidney Crosby, who's coming to the twilight of his career. You would think Alex Ovechkin's coming to the twilight of his career, but he just keeps putting up stupid numbers. So maybe not. Maybe they just wheel him out there and put him on the dot and turn that puck around the bell and let him light the lamp for another 5 years. Other than Ovechkin, Crosby, McDavid, Draisaitl, who else is in the mix? Who else is someone you would like to watch and think to yourself, maybe a decade from now we're having a different conversation about this guy?
I'm very excited for, again, bias here in Detroit, for Moritz Seider. The way he moves and the way he defends and plays, is capable of joining offense and contributing on the power play. Like, to me, he's potentially like Lindstrom level. I haven't seen and studied too many defensemen in the league, but the games that I've seen from him, it's really exciting to think what he might be capable of.
We don't really mention Nicholas Lidstrom either. The guy has a road named after him in Novi, Michigan. One of the greatest defensemen of all time. A lot of people would argue, if you take the offense that Larry Robinson and Bobby Orr produced, Doug Harvey even as well, that Nicholas Lidstrom defensively is maybe the greatest takeaway defenseman, shutdown defenseman for an offensive powerhouse in the history of hockey.
Yeah, for sure.
Can Seider be that? Do you see? The size of Seider is ridiculous. So can he go there?
Yeah. Again, like me not being super, knowledgeable about everybody in the league right now, from what I've seen in the way, just by watching him move, how fluid he is skating, the way he handles the puck, his heads up playmaking, running the power play, getting shots through, setting up a lot of offense. He's and defending, like he's tough with his stick. He's not easy to play against. It would be very frustrating to play against him as a forward. Yeah.
Obviously Doughty, Erik Karlsson, Brent Burns. You look at Drew Doughty, who you got a chance to play with. Any defensemen other than Seider who you think are going to crack this list?
Probably Doughty, actually. In terms of the impact he's had in LA and their cups and the numbers that he's been able to produce, he's got to be up there as well.
Yeah. I've seen lists where Doughty's name is on it. I've seen lists where just the durability of Duncan Keith and the cups that he won with the Blackhawks in Chicago.
Sure.
He gets mentioned in high regard. Where would you put a guy like Patrick Kane?
In terms of,
is Patrick Kane got a chance if he puts another 5 years up and wins another championship?
Yeah.
Does he have a chance to be in this conversation?
I would absolutely think so. Yeah. How many cups? 3?
3 in Chicago.
Yeah, for sure. If you've been a contributor to that kind of a success, like dynasty era, whatever for Chicago, I would think he's got to be.
If we think about some of the guys who are enforcers, let's do the very short list of the toughest guys, the enforcers who you would put in your just quick top 5
for being enforcers.
Yeah, I'm talking about any era. Who would your father-in-law say too?
Yeah, that's a good question. Was there a guy, Tony Twist?
Tony Twist.
Bob Probert.
Bob Probert's going to be at the top of a lot of lists.
I'm trying to think of some of the other heavyweights that I can remember.
Marty McSorley.
Yeah, McSorley, Ty Domi.
Ty Domi.
Yeah.
Did you get any fights?
Yeah.
Any against any of the guys who ended up making a living doing it?
No real heavyweights, no.
What is that? Is there a unwritten rule where, hey, the heavyweights don't mix it up with guys who are...
Yeah, like real heavyweights. Yeah, that's how it goes. Heavyweights pretty much are exclusively fighting heavyweights, but definitely some guys that were way tougher than me that, had scraps with. There was a guy named Jared Bowl. You remember him in Cleveland?
No.
Or, sorry, in Columbus for a while. We fought each other in juniors. He was probably one of the more famous, I wouldn't call him a heavyweight, but he was definitely a fighter. But yeah, a handful of guys through the AHL, guys that were way tougher than me. I probably shouldn't have been fighting, but you can count on both hands how many fights I had in my career. But actually, Mike Green, he said something to me that stuck with me. He said, fighting it's about showing up. So that was always something I thought about when getting into something. It's like, it's about showing up, defending your teammate, making sure people know you can't push you around. And a lot of times it's a momentum shift too. And so, yeah.
Every time that Steve Eisenman ever fought, and it wasn't a lot.
Yeah.
But when he did, it shifted the momentum of games.
Yep.
Guys said, okay, well, now everybody's throwing their hat in the ring. This was great, Corey. So I can't thank you enough. We broke down the list. All right, our time together has come to an end, but we know that the debate rages on. Go to GOATQuest.com. Tell us just how wrong we are. We're big boys. We can handle it. Until next time, be the GOAT at whatever you're doing today.